Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns, I teach knitting workshops in person and online, and I sell yarn, which you can find on my website yarnaddict.co.uk. Thank you for joining me today. Today is a tutorial, so I'm going to show you how to knit brioche in the round. My new cowl pattern, which is called Delightful, is worked in the round. So I thought it would be useful to do a tutorial to show you how to knit brioche in the round. If you work brioche in rows, then you will work row 1 using the main colour, then you will slide the stitches back to the beginning of the needle and you will work row 1 in the second colour. On one row you will work all the knit stitches, and on the other row you will work all the purl stitches, and the stitches you don't work you will be slipping. When you knit brioche in the round, you are doing the same thing, but because you're knitting in the round, it doesn't feel like you're doing the same thing. So I thought it'd be useful to do a tutorial showing you how to knit brioche in the round. I'm not going to show you the increases and decreases for this cowl. I'm just going to show you how to do brioche in the round, but this pattern is fairly simple. So if you know basic brioche increases and decreases, you shouldn't have a problem knitting this cowl. Also, the pattern of course explains how to do all the increases and decreases that are used in this pattern, and you can easily find YouTube tutorials for those stitches if you need to. I will link the pattern for this below. Make sure you sign up to my newsletter so you don't miss out on future pattern releases and tutorials and YouTube videos in general. I post videos on YouTube every single week, sometimes twice a week, and I do a combination of podcasts, tutorials, knit and chat episodes, knitting product and yarn reviews. So if you haven't subscribed there, please consider subscribing to my channel, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you have any questions, please ask below this video. Now I'm going to flip the camera around so you can see my hands, and I'll show you how to knit brioche in the round. When you're knitting brioche back and forth, so in rows, you knit each row twice. So you knit row 1, then you slide the stitches back to the beginning of the needle, and then you knit row 1 again. First time you would normally do the knit stitches, and then you go back and you work all the purl stitches, and then you turn, then you do row 2 in the one colour, and then you slide it back to the beginning and do row 2 in the second colour. When you work brioche in rows, so back and forth, you would do row 1 in one colour, and then when you get to the end, you would slide the stitches back to the beginning and do row 2 in the second colour. Normally you would do the knit stitches the first time, and then when you do the second row in the other colour, you would do all the purl stitches. Or in some patterns it might be vice versa, but you would normally do all the stitches in one colour. You'd either do all the knit stitches or the purl stitches, and you slide the stitches back to the beginning, and then you do the row again in the other colour, and then you would do the stitches you didn't work on the first row. So that's why the rows are numbered row 1 main colour or foreground colour, and row 2 second colour, complementary colour, background colour, whatever. But each row is numbered twice. So you have 2 row 1s and 2 row 2s and 2 row 3s and 2 row 4s. When you're knitting in the round, you are doing the same, but because you're working in the round, you're not sliding the stitches back to the beginning of the needle, because when you get to the beginning of the round, you are then just doing the second row 1. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm working in on magic loop. Doesn't matter if you're doing magic loop or if you're doing something that fills your needles completely. I've just cast on fewer stitches, so this will be a little bit quicker. But for example, if you're knitting one of my cowls, my Delightful cowl, your stitches would fill the whole circular needle, so you wouldn't need to do magic loop. But this would be the same if you do magic loop. So my marker is where the beginning of the round is. So I'll do this English style to start with. So the first stitch is to slip with the yarn in front. So I have the yarn in front, I slip the stitch purlwise, and then I'm going to knit the next stitch. So I knit it with the yarn in front, and that gives me the yarn over the slip stitch. And then I take the yarn to the front, slip the next stitch purlwise, and then I knit the next stitch with the yarn in front to give me the yarn over the slip stitch. If you're doing a continental style, you take the yarn over the needle, into the stitch purlwise, or you can take the needle behind the working yarn like that into the stitch purlwise, so that it gives you that yarn over the needle, and then you knit the next stitch. Yarn over and slip the stitch purlwise, knit. Yarn over and slip the stitch purlwise and knit. When I get to the end of the row, if I finish on a brioche knit stitch, I leave the yarn at the back, because that's where the yarn is when I finish the last stitch. If I finish with the brioche purl stitch, then I leave the yarn at the front, because that's where the yarn finishes when I finish knitting. If you purl Norwegian purl, then you keep the yarn at the back all the time. But if you finish with the brioche purl, still leave the yarn at the front. So if you finish with the brioche knit, leave the yarn at the back. If you finish with the brioche purl, leave the yarn at the front. Just drop the yarn and then pick up the second yarn. Okay, so I've dropped, because it's a brioche knit stitch, I'm going to leave the yarn at the back, so I'm just going to drop that yarn. And now we're going to do round 1 again. So it's not round 2, it is the second round 1 in the other colour. And that yarn is hanging down at the front, and you will see why at the end of this row. Is because it has to do that to get a yarn over that stitch I just brioche knitted. So I'm going to leave the yarn at the front, slip that stitch, and then depending on how you purl, so the yarn's already at the front and our first stitch is a brioche purl. So if you purl English style, the yarn's already at the front, so you just purl it. If you purl continental style, depending on how you purl, whether you do regular continental purl, you can just pick it up and purl. If you do Norwegian purl, then just take the yarn to the back and purl. Okay, and then I'm going to show this Norwegian purl style first, and then I'll do continental purl and English purl. So I'm going to slip the next stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. So I do a yarn over into the stitch purlwise and slip it off, and then I go behind to purl for Norwegian purl. If I'm doing English style, yarn to the front. Hang on. When you slip stitches in brioche, unless you're working a decrease, you would normally always slip the stitch with the yarn in front, and you would always slip the stitch purlwise. So I'm going to slip it with the yarn in front, and then because the next stitch is a purl stitch, I have to take the yarn, because that's the yarn over, that's the yarn in front for the yarn over. So I have to take the yarn around the needle, back to the front to get ready for the purl stitch. If I don't do that, then I don't get this yarn over the needle. So yarn's already at the front, so I can just slip the next stitch purlwise. Now, if you're working magic loop and you end up with a slip stitch, you have to be a little bit careful to make sure you don't lose that yarn over. So I'm going to just turn my needles around. This is not a problem if you're not doing magic loop. Okay. So before I start knitting again, I just double check that the yarn is still in front of that slip stitch. So purl that one, continental style, yarn over, into the stitch purlwise, take it off, and then if you purl regular continental style, you take the yarn to the front and then purl it, slip the stitch purlwise with the yarn over, and then purl it. Right, I'm just going to do a few more continental style just to speed this up a little bit. So I'm just going to do this quickly the way I normally do it. Okay, so I finished with a slip stitch with the yarn over. Now the problem is if you purl English style, this is a little bit tricky. You can't really rearrange the stitches so you finish with a knit stitch, because then you will always, every other needle, you will always, regardless of how you arrange your stitches on every other needle, you will always finish with a slip stitch. So if you are purling English style, you need to take the needle behind like that into the stitch. So the yarn is at the front here, into the stitch purlwise, then purl it. So just check that you get the yarn over So you get the yarn over that last stitch there. If you don't, you can always pick it up on the next row, so it's not the end of the world. You just got to keep an eye on it. Okay, so let's carry on doing it English style for a few more stitches. Very difficult to alternate between different ways of knitting when you do this. Okay, so I've just purled, so the yarn's at the front, slip that stitch purlwise, take the yarn all the way around back to the front, so I'm ready to purl. Slip it, yarn's at the front, so I can just slip the next stitch purlwise, and then I take the yarn all the way around. If I just go straight into that stitch and purl because the yarn's at the front, let me just do it and you can see what happens. You don't get the yarn over that purple stitch. Can you see that? You just get the yarn. Hang on, I just dropped that stitch. I didn't actually purl it. Let's try that again. So if I just purl that with the yarn at the front from when I slipped that stitch, can you see you just get that yarn instead of looping over that slip stitch, you just get that yarn sitting in front of it, which means that you can pick it up and knit and work it on the next row, but you do have to remember to pick it up. So after you've slipped the stitch purlwise with the yarn in front, you have to take the yarn back to the front, ready to pull the next stitch. Okay, so slip yarn around the needle. I do think brioche on the purl row is easier if you do it continental style. Slip yarn all the way around. I know I'm not very good at English purl, but even if you are good at English purl, it can be quite confusing. Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit tricky when you are knitting, when you're ending with a slip stitch with yarn in front. So you slip that stitch. Now if I just leave that yarn there, I will lose that yarn over. So I have to, when I finish a round on the slip stitch, I have to take the yarn around the needle and leave it at the front. So regardless of whether I knit English style or continental style, so if I do this continental style, slip that stitch with the yarn over, I have to take the yarn between the needles to the front and drop it, just let it hang down at the front, because otherwise you lose that yarn over the last slip stitch. And the next time I pick up that pink yarn and work with it, I'm going to be purling the next stitch anyway, so the yarn should be at the front. Even if you do Norwegian purl, the yarn is technically at the front, even though you don't take the yarn to the front. So the main thing to remember when you work in the round is to always, if you finish with the slip stitch with the yarn over, you always leave the yarn at the front. If you finish with the brioche purl stitch, you always leave the yarn at the front. If you finish with a brioche knit stitch or a brioche knit decrease, you leave the yarn at the back. Brioche purl stitch, brioche purl decrease, or a slip with the yarn in front, you leave the yarn at the front. So now I slip my marker and then I just pick up my purple yarn and start working with that one. So let me know if you have any questions, just ask below this video. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. I post regular tutorials, podcast episodes, knit and chat videos, yarn and knitting product reviews, pattern reviews, loads of stuff here on YouTube. I post videos every single week, sometimes twice a week. So please, so please subscribe if you haven't already. If you're already a subscriber, then thank you very much. I really appreciate you. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.